It's true. Across the globe, women aren't as prosperous as men. Gender inequality is a pressing moral issue, but we forget it has massive economic implications. If you were to put all of the women who don't have access to formal financial services in one place, they would make up the third largest country in the world. That means an entire population without bank accounts, credit cards, or other tools you and I likely benefit from daily. Prosperity for women starts with inclusive policies, products, and people around the globe, and the investment to make it happen. Welcome to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast. My name is Sonia Kelly, and I lead Women's World Banking's proprietary research division. Join me as I speak with changemakers around the globe to deconstruct the social and economic exclusion women face. We'll discover new evidence together and drive action to accelerate women's economic empowerment. Because a leg up isn't a handout, it's a global game changer. Indeed. Welcome and thank you so much for tuning in to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, which is now streaming on YouTube and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sonia Kelly. If you're listening on YouTube, you'll be able to find additional insights and resources linked in the description of the video. Before we get started, I'd like to give a special shout out to the sponsor of the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, Ernst & Young LLP. EY is a global leader working across assurance, consulting, law, strategy, tax, and transactions. EY teams ask better questions to find new answers for the complex issues facing our world today. You can visit their website at ey.com to explore their latest insights and services. Now let's jump into the show. Today we're talking about Kenya, about climate change, and about women's economic opportunity. Let me give you a bit of an intro to this topic. By 2050, climate change effects are expected to cause the internal displacement of 216 million people. That's more than tripling the current size of the refugee population in the world. It will cause sea level rise of multiple feet and associated flooding of cities like New York City and other global coastal cities. And it will create water stress for more than 70% of the world's population, among other social, economic, and environmental impacts. In other words, climate change effects will financially impact nearly everyone in the coming decades. But we're not today just talking about a future crisis. We're talking about a crisis that is very much at the forefront of our minds and very much something that we're experiencing right now. Let me give you some examples from Women's World Banking's markets. In Indonesia, Jakarta, which was the capital city until just a little bit ago, actually just a year ago, Jakarta has been downgraded from the capital city, and Indonesia has moved its capital city because of the climate vulnerabilities that Jakarta is facing. In addition, every year I see in India and Bangladesh front page news stories of the flash floods and the decimation of property. And growing seasons as well have changed substantially for farmers in Latin America with challenges to livelihoods. Now, we like to say at Women's World Banking that the climate crisis is not gender neutral. And this is not just something that's our perspective, but something that's validated in the literature and in data. Women and girls experience the greatest impacts of climate change. Climate changes amplify existing gender inequalities, and they pose unique threats to livelihoods, health, and safety. When we at Women's World Banking talk about this intersection of climate change and women's financial inclusion, we're actually talking about three different things. And I'm going to go through those before I introduce our guest to kind of frame our conversation. These things are adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. Now, adaptation is something we're thinking about today to prevent devastation tomorrow, recognizing climate realities. This could mean ensuring a woman has a way of cooling her shop, or it could mean building shelters for livestock so they aren't wiped out by a heat wave, or it could mean financing new farming techniques or water access given changing growing conditions. Now, mitigation is literally mitigating climate change, allowing women to participate in climate solutions by changing energy use patterns, decreasing carbon emissions, or other ways of changing the way we work in our day-to-day lives. This might be financing for green technology or clean energy like solar power, electric vehicles, or clean cook stoves. And finally, resilience. When we talk about resilience, we're talking about the fact that women with access to financial services are better equipped to deal with the shocks related to climate risks and to build their resilience, as well as the resilience of their families and their communities. We recognize that investing in women's financial inclusion is not just a response to climate change, it's a proactive strategy for sustainable development. Now, I want to share a quick story of climate change and the role financial services plays in something that Women's World Banking recently experienced. And Women's World Banking works in some of the most climate vulnerable places in the world, including India. And in Shahjahanpur in India, Women's World Banking has been working with Bank of Baroda, which is one of the largest banks in the country, to increase women's savings frequency. Now, unfortunately, there were devastating rains in Shahjahanpur, which created flash floods and therefore widespread damage to the homes and businesses of women and their families. And while many people were financially devastated in Shahjahanpur, the women that we had worked with who had saved in a financial institution had some emergency funds to fall back on. Now, not only that, but we saw collective action on the part of the insurance industry, in part urged by the insurance regulator, IRDAI, to process claims quickly and digitally. The insurance companies set up 24-hour hotlines to make sure they had the resources to process claims as quickly as they possibly could. And for many of the women we spoke with in that region directly after the floods, the financial services they had access to, savings and insurance, meant the difference between resilience and devastation. So with that introduction, let me introduce our guest, Dr. Jennifer Riria. She's the president and CEO of Echo Network and one of Africa's leading women entrepreneurs. She has distinguished herself as a microfinance banker and practitioner, a researcher like me, and a gender specialist. She has served in many leadership roles for which she has been recognized locally and internationally. For example, in 2013, she was awarded the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award for East Africa, and subsequently the EY Entrepreneur of the Year Award, at which point she was admitted to EY's Global Hall of Fame. Few women in the microfinance world are as recognizable as Dr. Riria. If there's one woman that is proof of the power of individual entrepreneurs to make a difference, it's her. She has single-handedly transformed the microfinance industry in her native Kenya in order to tangibly improve the lives of nearly 1 million women. And because of her efforts, hundreds of thousands of Kenyan women have first-time access to finance that was previously not available to them. As a result, she has empowered women to live their lives and fulfill their own potential and dreams. Welcome, Dr. Riria.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for allowing me to participate on Women's World Banking, my heartthrob institution platform. Yeah.
I love that. We are very happy to be your heart institution.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you, given your remarkable story, to share a little bit about how you got here, because with virtually no prior financial background, you ended up leading one of Kenya's largest microfinance institutions, providing nearly 1.3 billion in loans to low-income women, which is so remarkable. What drew you to the financial inclusion space and making finance work for women?
Well, for me, where I came from, and why my interest in financial inclusion for women is the humble background that I grew, seeing poverty, feeling poverty, living poverty, and touching it. Looking at my mother and other women in the village as they struggled to survive. And at that early age, I only knew it was my mother, it was my auntie, it was the woman across the fence. I never knew it was anybody else. And the aim was, I'm going to get my mother out of here. But as I grew and as I interacted and as I got some more education and some more exposure internationally, I began to realize this is a global phenomenon. It is not my village problem. It's an international problem. And poverty is common to all women wherever they are. And that's why I began step by step trying to see how can we include women in what they do, in what they think, and in how they act. That's where we got here. And of course, then we have institutions like Women's World Banking that worked with us those early days to give us not only skill, but to expose us to ways and means of reaching poor women in the rural areas.
That resonates with me so much because at Women's World Banking, we talk a lot about our women-centered design process, which it sounds so basic, but actually listening to the stories of women and hearing their needs and preferences is essential to making sure that finance works for them. So I just love that the women themselves who you were aiming to serve are so much a part of your story. And I think that's one of the reasons you have been so successful is like, you know what they need and you're able to craft finance to make sure that that's what they end up getting.
That is true. Most of the time people think women are stupid. They don't know what they are supposed to be doing. Women know what they need. And from my experience, I can tell you, women know exactly what they need. What they don't know is how to do it, where to do it, who to do it with. And in particular, in trying to access financial services, access to financial resources to enable them to invest, to enable them articulate their own needs is very difficult. And that's where we have to come in, Sonia. That's where we have to ask, where do we fit to help them come along? And as we go on, I will be able to tell you how we have done it to bring them on.
I love that. I'm looking forward to that in our conversation. But first, let me thank you and ask you a question after the thank you. The thank you is, you mentioned what Women's World Banking has done for you. I would be remiss if I didn't say what you, Dr. Riria, did for Women's World Banking. You have been so many amazing things to us, including a former board chair, and your own institution was an original Women's World Banking Network member. You're a big part of our story over our 45 years of making finance work for women. Can you tell me what drew you to Women's World Banking and contributing to our journey?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sonia. When I joined Kenya Women Microfinance Institution then, which has since grown to Microfinance Bank, and which has got an offshore now Econ Network, Africa Foundation, all of them rolled into one. The first thing we did was we thought, let's give money, put dollars in women's hands. And we did. To begin with, $1. You'll be surprised. $1 to begin with, for a woman to be able to bake small cakes and sell them and bring food on the table for our family. That's where we began. But then we continued realizing women are not about money alone. I remember the former president, Nancy Barrett, saying all the time, women are not about money. Women are not just about money. Women need other services that touch on their lives. We began slowly to realize we need Women's World Banking in this space to be able to bring this knowledge. This knowledge was not there. Opening the banking halls for women was not a walk in the park. We had to fight. We have to negotiate. We have to politicize. We have to go to the streets and say, women are bankable. Some of the statements you hear being mentioned today, used today by everybody loosely. Women are bankable. Poor people are bankable. They are credible. So we began that route and we said to Women's World Banking, Women's World Banking was in the space because Women's World Banking had experience around the world more than us. That information around the world, Women's World Banking packaged it and came to some of us like KWFT and said, why don't you try this? And we tried it. What did we try? We tried savings. We told women, you need savings. You need to save a little money for the future. And we showed them how to save. We told women, you need to engage in what you know how to do best. We never went to the women and told them, sell a pen, sell a potato. But we found a woman selling potatoes. We supported them to sell more potatoes, but out of that sale, to save a little money. So we learned savings was important. We also learned from Women's World Banking, you have to have systems. Institutions are important to support women's work, to support women's inclusion. We learned that from Women's World Banking. So we began copying. If you come to Eco Network Africa now, if you come to the foundation now, you'll find some of the documentation we worked at Women's World Banking when I sat on the board, which we came and replicated word for word. I called the president and said, I am going to plagiarize this. And she says, go ahead and plagiarize. So we were part and parcel of the Women's World Banking family. So we learned we need to have institutions that are going to back up women's inclusion, to back up women fight for equality on the table. That is one. Then we learned women need to continue learning. Learning is important for women. The world is changing. And Women's World Banking was working with us all the time to be able to do this. So at Women's World Banking, we came for knowledge. We called Women's World Banking the Knowledge Hub. That's what we called Women's World Banking, the Knowledge Hub. So now you know why we came to Women's World Banking. It's to learn.
I love that. And I like being a knowledge hub as a researcher. That really resonates with me. Well, let's turn now to talking a little bit about climate. Kenya is experiencing the worst drought in 4 decades, the worst locust invasion in 7 decades, plus the domino effects of the global pandemic. And in particular, northern Kenyans are living out of what's been called an unreported crisis and facing an uncertain future. The World Bank also classifies Kenya as one of the top 30 most climate vulnerable countries in the world, putting it into their high risk category. So I'd love to hear from you what challenges you're witnessing in your home country as it relates to climate change and women entrepreneurs today.
Eco Network Foundation is very concerned about the impact that climate change has on women. And why is that so? Because women are the farmers in this country. Almost 80% of farming is done, smallholder farming, by women. Climate change has caused loss of seasons. We don't have seasons anymore. Women we don't articulate when rains can fail. And that causes a lot of stress on women who are the food, they're the source of food in the family. They're the ones who bring food to the table. They are the ones who know what nutrition is. So you'll find women are getting even more malnutrited. Children are getting more, you'll find children are getting also more malnutrited. That affects the health of women as well. In addition to that, we find if a woman doesn't have farming returns from her farming activities, she just make a little bit money. And I know we'll be coming to that, but let me mention it because it's very connected. She doesn't have a return on her farming. She can't go to hospital. She can't take her daughter to school. Her voice is reduced because now she's reduced to dependent. So it's climate change has caused women not only mental but physical and emotional stress. Right now, I can tell you, in Kenya, since January, rains have been falling, very heavy rains. most sufferers are women and children. You will see them trekking across flooded families, carrying babies, carrying things on their heads. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but this is our causes of climate change. Now, when they're displaced like this, you then get violence against women, rape, and peace, no security for women. Security levels for women become really reduced to almost zero. So this is it connects not only from economics, but it goes to social, and it also touches on women's security and equality in this country.
Wow. Yeah, I actually hadn't thought of some of those connections that you made between financial stress, but then other forms of stress, and then women's security as well. Like, it's not just crop failure, it's also their personal security and challenges that come from widespread economic crisis and instability. Thank you for sharing that. You already started turning to finance and the power of finance, and I'd love to chat more about that. First, looking back at the last decade plus in Kenya, we know that in Africa, across Africa, 245 million women do not have access to financial services. But in Kenya, 75% of women do have access. And your work has been a big part of this journey to empower women in Kenya with financial services access. So I'd love some reflections on that and what they mean for the future. Kenya's story is very digital. How do you see digital financial access contributing to the climate crisis and furthering this empowerment today, recognizing what's happened in the past decade?
As you say, Sonia, in Kenya, access to financial services for women has increased tremendously. From when we started with Women's World Banking, when we were wearing dollars on our hair and saying women are bankable in Belgium in 1995, until now, the difference is tremendous.
I'm going to need a photo of that. We have to find a photo of that, of the dollars in the hair. Oh, that's amazing.
I will check what I've won in my album, wearing dollars in my head in Belgium, saying women are bankable. Things have changed in Kenya a great deal. Apart from opening the doors for banking halls for women, Kenyan government has been very proactive in setting up funds. We have more than 6 funds, different funds set up that women can easily access for involving in business. And of course, there are many other NGOs in this country, in Kenya, that are dealing with financial inclusion for women, apart from Eco Network, Kenya Women Microfinance, and Eco Network Africa Foundation. Having said that, I think the digital age now is playing a very big role, and we need to be very careful so that women are not left behind. The digital difference in this country is between men and women is 8%. Now, let me say that ICT is critical to accessing all these funds I've talked about. So women must have the digital knowledge to be able to log in. Kenya is becoming very digital. And for you to access any government services, you need to have a digital knowledge. The problem is women may have telephones, but only digital educated to a certain level. So that is what we need to watch as women in this country, because it's going to cause inequality if we don't begin addressing ICT education for women and girls at this moment. That is very important. And I think the Kenyan government has tried very hard to make sure that the digital divide is left narrow. But you see, digital knowledge goes with education. So girls must stay in school. Once again, I connect it again. Girls must stay in school. Access to the systems and infrastructure must be increased and improved in their villages so that women are able to access ICT. Because the biggest problem is infrastructure in our rural country, where few women are able to utilize ICT equipment. That is important. And girls concern me a lot because if they are left out, they drop out of school very early, which is happening because of early teenage pregnancies and poor cultural practices, bad cultural practices. We have cultural bad practices, all over the world, here too, where girls are married early, where girls drop out of school and get married. That creates that divide that I'm talking about that will not be closed unless these women living in the rural areas get. So I think that the digital platforms that serve financial services must focus also on women and girls, and especially young women and girls.
And now a word from our sponsor. EY applauds Women's World Banking's 45-year legacy empowering women through financial inclusion. Together, we have a common vision to build a better financial services industry, one that is stronger, fairer, and more sustainable. Find out more on ey.com. Yeah, that's so important. It makes me think of a study by Dr. Susan Johnson at Bath University. She did a study of M-Pesa in Kenya, and she showed increased resilience among women who had access to mobile money because it increased the effectiveness of their social network to solve their financial problems. But like you said, if women don't have the digital literacy or the technology literacy to be able to operate those platforms and also to be able to contribute to their development as women leaders in the finance space, we're not going to see those big impacts for women. Go ahead.
And Sonia, more than that, the control that we think that women should take control of their lives, unless they have this digital control, they are not going to be able to control. But when a woman has digital, a gadget that she can put her money in, and she is able to save that money for herself, and it is not exposed to everybody in the family, she is able to contribute to the family better and to herself. So this, for me, I'm thinking of it as very critical at the moment.
Yeah, that's totally true. Women need control and they need privacy of their finances.
They need privacy, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the path forward. We like to say at Women's World Banking that gender equality and financial access is the most urgent climate action of all, because women with access to financial services are better equipped to deal with the shocks related to climate risks and to build their own resilience, like we've just discussed, alongside the resilience of their families and their communities. And you mentioned in Kenya this 8 percentage point gap between men's and women's access to accounts, which is actually fairly close to the global average. Supporting what you said at the beginning, it's not my village's problem, it's an international problem. And I think this is a great example, like Kenya's gender gap in access is the same as it is globally. So tell me, from your vantage point, why are we still seeing this pervasive gender gap in financial access? And what is the path forward to equality? You already mentioned digital literacy and ICT. Are there other factors that are really important to closing this gender gap?
Sonia, one of the most important things to close the digital gap is knowledge. That's first of all. And that's why I'm thinking if women were able to receive information beforehand, When are the rains coming? Where are the rains coming? How long will these rains, last? What kind of crops? Knowledge. What kind of crops do I need to plant? I travel in this country sometimes and I see the areas that are planting corn. And I say, if they planted beans, this rains, 3 months, 2 rains, they would have got a crop, a bamba crop. So I tell myself, if the women knew, they would not plant corn. They will plant beans. And beans, they can use a bit of beans to either market or even butter for maize, for corn. So I think that information that relates to that comes through digital frameworks. Farmers now in this country, for example, are selling even goats on platform, on their phones, using their phones. I think once again, it is the information, it is the education that must reach women. That's one and for all. The other one is that whatever we do, they have to evolve, or if they're there now, enhanced institutions that understand what the needs of women are. Because sometimes when we plan, when we budget, non-gender budgeting, non-gender planning, women are left out because everybody thinks their needs are the same as everybody else. For me, planning with a gender lens is a must in our countries for us to be able to reach them. And there's something else that I'm going to say, which I think it is nothing to do with climate and it has nothing to do with the finance. It has to do with the societal norms and ethics. A society that does not respect a woman as a human being, that society will never develop. It doesn't matter how many big buildings you build. I begin to see as a trend in our society, a trend for increased genocide. So many women are being just murdered. You look at these crimes and you wonder what is the source of these crimes? This is lack of respect for women as a human being. So a woman will be treated like a thing. How we are going to handle that in our societies, it is something that is really difficult and very sad, but it has got to be handled. Ethics in our societies, ethics that look at human beings as human beings, and not from a biological perspective, and then from a human perspective. That is worse than climate change right now, let me tell you. Climate change is bad. But when a human element joins the climate change challenges, then we have it very rough.
Yeah, it's like exacerbating the climate challenges and exacerbating the financial sector challenges that women face. Yeah. Well, let me end with a question that'll allow you to give a bit of a call to action. And my question is, what can other countries' finance leaders, both private and public, learn from Kenya that they can replicate in their own context? What is your message to the other leaders in finance outside of Kenya?
Once again, Sonia, I've said that my emphasis is that people should do their strategies, their planning from a gender perspective, so that needs of everyone, of every gender is understood. So it's, what we have learned from Kenya, and I would like to share, is that Kenya began realizing that. And I think that's why, I know that's why our government, listening to the voice of women, began setting up funds that are specifically related to women's businesses, so that women can borrow from those funds, can benefit from those funds. But I think that it has to be a whole national perspective, that the nations want to bring women along. So we keep the dialogue. So one of the things that we have understood is that women must be in positions of power. Women leadership is critical to be able to achieve some of these goals we are setting. So women's leadership in all matters must be considered very seriously. Women's voices cannot just be raised just like that. We have also learned that it is very important to bring men along. We have said, and I keep on saying to everybody who wishes to listen, that our problem of gender imbalance and gender inequality is not a women's problem. It is a societal problem. It has to be handled as a societal need. And therefore, both men and women must see the reason why they will involve everyone in development. Otherwise, it will not happen. So we have learned that, and we want to, we like to share that. We also like to share our other lessons we have learned, that the digital education should start not just for work, not from government offices, but young children should begin to get involved in learning how to use technology to build, to innovate, and to enjoy their lives. But they should begin at a very young age.
Thank you so much, Dr. Riria. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I have so many notes from our conversation, and I'm going to be digesting this over the next couple of days. I'm so grateful for your contributions to women's world banking, for your contributions to women in Kenya, and for your perspective today, sharing your perspective from your vantage point where you are. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I look forward to having another discussion.
Thank you. Like I said, I have so many notes from that conversation. If I were somebody who had an active account on X, here are some of the anecdotes I would put on there. One, I loved when she said, "It's not my village problem; it's an international problem." She also said, "People think women are stupid, but they know what they need." She said, "Let's put dollars into women's hands." Oh my goodness, I have so many anecdotes here. Women need control and privacy over their finances, and that contributes to their economic empowerment. She also talked about the importance of knowledge, just general knowledge, to reduce market inequalities for women farmers and women entrepreneurs. And then this is the one that really stands out. She said, women's equality is not a woman's problem, it's a societal problem. And I think that's a lesson we can all take away from this conversation. Just a few notes of resources you might want to check out if this discussion resonated with you. First, all of the data that I shared on climate impacts and how we might think about climate in the context of financial inclusion are from a brief that Women's World Banking put out on climate change and women's adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. And so we'll put the link to that brief on the YouTube page, but you can also check it out by just Google searching it and going to our website. If you work on climate in some way, please listen to Jennifer when she says that women's equality is not a women's problem, it's a societal problem, and take that charge on to put women in places of leadership, either in designing solutions or in being contributors to solving climate challenges as consumers. We can also, from a policy perspective, think about enforcing sustainable finance regulations that incentivize financial services providers to adopt gender transformative financial products, addressing climate challenges and supporting women's resilience, and really listening to women, as Jennifer implored us to do. And we are all, literally all of us, people who are empowered with a responsibility to play a role in slowing climate change and creating resilience in the midst of this changing world. If you found today's discussion valuable, don't forget to subscribe or rate or leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. We only recently just made this transition to allowing the platform to sit on all of the platforms. And so your feedback matters tremendously at this point for us and helps us to bring you the content that resonates with you. Please stay engaged, stay informed, and I look forward to connecting with you in our next episode during Women's History Month, May 16th.